Vítám vás u dalšího dílu podcastu Vysokého napětí, což, jak dobře víte, je nejsledovanější a nejposlouchanější český podcast o energetice. Mým dnešním hostem bude profesor ekologie a environmentální biologie Robert Warren Howarth z Cornellovské univerzity. Člověk, který se věnuje hodně metanu, věnuje se hodně emisí metanu. Je to člověk, který vyvolal velký zájem studií, která kritizovala emise a počítala emise při těžbě zemního plynu a následného jeho převážení do jiných částí světa. Varovala před dopady, které to může mít na klimatickou změnu. Já jsem si Roberta Warrena Howartha pozval do dnešního dílu. Hi, nice to meet you and nice to see you and hear you.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Yeah. Our interview will be mainly about methane. In Europe and also in the Czech Republic, we are trying to replace domestic coal with LNG. Do you think is this a truly good way to fight climate change?
No, I wish I could give you good news, but I think it's a really bad idea to go the LNG route. Coal is bad, and the Czech people and the people of Europe should do everything they can to move away from coal as quickly as possible. But substituting in LNG is even worse for the climate in terms of my research. And, the path that one really should be taking forward is a world powered without fossil fuels, with renewable energy and battery storage and heat pumps for heating. Those technologies are there. They're cost effective today. Taking that side route onto LNG would be a tragic mistake.
Yeah. In the European Union, the gas is a transitional fuel, as we say. So, but I think almost every politician forgot about the methane emissions, which are actually, it's in your study, actually, these methane emissions are the biggest one in the United States during the extraction. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, there are two aspects to it. This whole idea that natural gas can be a transition fuel at all is based on the fact that when you finally burn the fuel, carbon dioxide emissions from gas are less than when you burn coal, or about 40% less. That's a big deal. But what people don't understand is that those emissions from the carbon dioxide in the final burning are a small part of the overall footprint of the fuel. It's about a third. So 2/3 of the greenhouse gas impact of using natural gas comes mostly from methane, as you say, but also from indirect carbon dioxide emissions. It takes a lot of energy to supercool gas into liquid form. It takes a lot of energy to transport LNG by tanker, and those emissions count there too. You can't ignore them. But yeah, methane is the big whammy here, and people don't pay much attention to methane. But the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in their last global synthesis report, now from 3 years ago, these are the nations, the globe's leading climate scientists brought together under the auspices of the United Nations. They strongly say that 1/3 of all climate warming that's happened since the Industrial Revolution is due to methane. 50% from carbon dioxide, the rest is due to small other gases. So carbon dioxide is the biggest problem, but methane is almost right up there, and we can't ignore it. And you can't, gas is methane. And you simply can't develop, use it, transport it without having some of it emitted unburned to the atmosphere. For the time it's in the atmosphere, methane is 100 times more potent than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. And so small emissions of it really, really add up.
And what is going on in atmosphere? And can you describe how does the methane behave in the atmosphere?
Well, as I say, it's an incredibly potent greenhouse gas. It's the good news is it doesn't stay in the atmosphere for as long as carbon dioxide, but it has a half-life of well over a decade. So, 12 years after we emit it, half of it's gone. In 24 years, 3/4 of it's gone. But that's a long time. And during that time, it's absorbing infrared radiation. That's what greenhouse gases are about. And it does so in wavelengths which carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases do not. And so it plays a major role in the global warming we've seen to date. And, we need to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, and we need to do so as quickly as possible. But we also need to reduce methane emissions with the same urgency.
And when you compare carbon dioxide and methane and hydrogen, which is another transitional fuel for the European economy, let's say in 10 or 20 years, which one is more potent?
In terms of greenhouse gas, as a greenhouse gas, methane is far more potent than carbon dioxide. It's 100 times, 105 times more potent as an absorber of infrared radiation. Hydrogen is actually not a direct greenhouse gas, so it itself is not absorbing infrared radiation. But when we leak hydrogen into the atmosphere, it does have a climate influence because it prolongs the time that methane stays in the atmosphere. It increases the amount of water that ends up high in the atmosphere, in the stratosphere, has climate aspects as well. Not as bad as carbon dioxide and nowhere near as bad as methane, but it's not a freebie either.
Actually, your research, I think, influenced mainly partly Joe Biden's decision to halt the approval of liquefied natural gas exports it's January 2024, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Just about 13 months ago,
yes,
he gave a press conference on it, and he actually cited my research as one of the two reasons he was doing so. The other reason he did, and I'm not an economist, but he also said he was worried about the economic ramifications to the United States and to the consumers of the United States, which is a real concern. Just a bit of an aside. Again, I'm not an economist. I'm a climate scientist.
Yeah, but
we banned LNG exports from the United States until 2016, and that wasn't because of climate. It was because of concerns over our own energy security. And we are already, I'm told by my economist friends, seeing some inflationary pressure on energy, including electricity, not just gas, in the United States because of our LNG exports. We're now the world's largest LNG exporter. If we continue to increase our LNG exports, people in the United States will feel it. And I personally would not want to be a nation dependent on long, continual energy policy from the United States in these days. We go back and forth in terms of what sort of a government we have. If Americans wake up and realize that these LNG exports, maybe they're good for the big oil and gas industry, but not so good for the U.S. consumer, I could easily imagine that another few years, 5 years, we ban the export of LNG again.
Actually, yeah, as you already said, that I would say everything changed in the United States during the last month from the European perspective. So
from ours too.
But we don't know what is the Donald Trump stance on LNG regarding the methane emissions.
Well, Donald Trump has said repeatedly that climate change is a scam. It's not a real issue. So if you're not worried about climate change, then don't worry about methane, right? I mean, I guess I'm deeply concerned about methane. I've spent the last 15 to 20 years of my career worrying about methane emissions, but I also feel that climate change is the existential threat to the functioning of our human society going forward on the timescale of just the next couple of decades. So if you believe in climate change, you got to believe in reducing methane. But if you think climate change is a scam and you don't worry about any environmental issue, then sure, forget methane too. Why not?
Yeah. Methane leaks occur during the extraction. And is it feasible to reduce these emissions?
Let me make a gentle correction to you. You started by saying it leaks during the initial phase of extraction, and then you talked about emissions. Leaks implies it's coming out of a pipeline, and you just go out there with a big wrench and you tighten up the joint and you solve the leak, right?
Yeah.
It's an accident waiting to be solved. And for sure, there are leaks, but the bigger problem are emissions, which are a purposeful part of the operations. So I could give you many, many examples, but let me give you one. When you move gas through a high pressure pipeline system, say you go from the gas extraction field to the LNG liquefaction plant, you have to do maintenance on that pipeline now and then, and you cannot go in and weld on a gas pipeline that's full of methane because it could explode.
Yeah.
So the industry practice is to take all of the methane, all the gas that's in the pipeline and release it to the atmosphere. That's a big emission. Doesn't happen every day. It only happens when you do maintenance. But, most of the emissions we're talking about are those sort of purposeful part of the operations. Are there ways to reduce some of those? For some of them, yes. For the pipeline maintenance, no. Really, people don't have an alternative for what you do for the gas. There are other places where we could perhaps reduce the emissions. Another example is that to pressurize the gas as it moves through a pipeline, the compressors that power that pressure are powered by burning gas themselves. And they don't burn the gas with 100% efficiency, so some methane slips through in their exhaust stream and is emitted. And again, that's not a leak, it's just the way they operate. You could replace those compressors with electric compressors instead, and that would reduce that emission. The gas industry is very, very opposed to doing that. They say it would be a security risk because it's easier to hack into and control the electric supply that controls those compressors, and it could lead to an explosion in the pipeline. So they don't want to do that for safety reasons. But as long as they keep with the technologies they have, they're going to emit methane.
I was actually very surprised when I saw the map with the methane emissions from the gas extraction, and the methane emissions were actually bigger in the United States than in the Russia. How it is possible?
Yeah, well, at this point, we have better information on emissions in the United States than anywhere else. I actually published the first paper on how methane emissions from natural gas, shale gas extraction could be a climate problem. And I published that 14 years ago now, right? At the time, there were no other papers. There are now 2,000 papers in the peer-reviewed literature where people have gone to look at this. There are about 1 million observations of where people have gone out and measured methane emissions from natural gas operations, but virtually all in the United States, because that's where we are focused originally. And we are the world's largest gas producer. We're the world's largest exporter of LNG, so it makes sense to concentrate here. The information we'd have in Russia or Qatar or other major producers isn't as good. And I think, you're referring to satellite data, and they do suggest that it's probably worse, say, in the Permian Basin, the southwestern United States, than in Russia. I believe that could be true. I think it's going to take another 5 to 10 years of science to really be sure if that's true or not. But there are differences just in terms of how the industries operate, how they process it. And, we within the United States, we see variation too. The emissions are worse in some gas fuels than in others. Partly that's a function of the companies operating, but partly it's a function of the geology of the area.
There are different methods of extraction. There are a lot of discussions about fracturing and other methods. Which one is the worst for the climate, for the environmental situation?
Yeah. Well, here in the United States, almost all 80 to 85% of our natural gas production now is from shale gas. It's from fracking, high volume hydraulic fracturing. And this technology wasn't commercially available 20 years ago. It's new technology. It's still mostly used in the United States. If you look at the Russian gas fields, they're not fracking. So, people argue. In my initial paper that I published 14 years ago, I said, the fracking process itself probably makes these methane emissions worse. People still debate whether that's true or not. And to be honest, we don't have enough data to know, because at this point, everything that's going on in the United States is from fracking. So we don't have a good comparison, right? If the emissions are actually worse in some of the fields in the United States than in Russia, it would be because we frack and they don't. And there are reasons to think those emissions could be bigger. This fracking technology, people don't really understand, but it starts with high volume, high precision directional drilling. So they drill down maybe 10, 20 kilometers into the earth. They find a shale formation, rocks that contain methane gas in them still. Those might be only 10 meters thick. They find them, and then they change the direction of their drill, and they drill out laterally, horizontally for, maybe another 10, 15 kilometers. So massive drilling. there's methane emissions associated with that. You're going through old methane pockets and stuff at those great depths. And then you fracture, so high volume hydraulic fracturing, massive amounts of water with chemical additives. You break up the rock, stuff starts flowing back to the surface. It takes them a while to get they call it flow back. It's sort of a frothy mix of water and gas, and can take days, weeks sometimes to get that under control. And meanwhile, that frothiness is methane, and it's released to the atmosphere. Is it possible to capture it? Yes, but it's expensive, difficult. You don't make any money off of that, and so they don't tend to do it. And that's part of the issue. Again, that's not a leak, right? That's how the operation works.
Yeah, but in the European Union, the fracking is forbidden in the whole European Union, as you know. Is it a mistake or not?
Yes. No, it's not. It's a mistake to frack. It's not a mistake to ban fracking. I live in the state of New York. We too have banned fracking. So, unfortunately, all of our gas is fracked gas. It comes from other states, and it has high methane emissions. They occur in other states. So, the act of banning it, I think, is good. It's not enough. You also don't want to be taking the fracked gas. We in New York shouldn't be using fracked gas. You in the Czech Republic and in Europe shouldn't be taking our fracked gas either. I mean, going back to the start of this conversation, the world needs to move away from all fossil fuels quickly. And again, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change tells us this. We need to be largely free of all fossil fuel use within the next 20 years. Yeah. And, that includes fracked gas. Fracked gas moved by LNG is probably the worst fossil fuel from the climate perspective. It's not a transitional fuel. But even if it were a little bit better, we still would need to move away from it. The world simply cannot afford to do that. And we have the alternatives. If I was talking to you 20 years ago, we could say, oh gosh, sooner or later we'll be ready for solar, wind, hydro, and maybe battery technologies will come along, and maybe we'll have these miraculous heat pumps that can extract heat from the environment and heat our homes so effectively and all, but that's far off. Well, no, those technologies are all there. They're maturing, they're cost effective. The only thing keeping us from doing it is this sort of misinformation campaigns coming out of oil and gas to preserve their business models, quite frankly.
Yeah. EU will soon implement some regulations on methane emissions. Do you think it will work? And what's your view on this?
I've been asked some version of that question for well over a decade, and at the end years of the Obama administration back in 2016, I was invited to the White House to give a briefing on this very topic to the senior administration staff under President Obama. And at that time, I advised against going the methane regulation rule. And the reason was that at the time, it was too difficult to monitor whether or not the regulations would actually work. And I really viewed it as a fig leaf from industry saying, oh, we'll regulate, we'll take care of the problem. The times have changed since then because we can monitor methane emissions from space using satellite data now. And so it is easier to determine if regulations actually work or not. So I've over time, with the increased monitoring technology, changed my mind and think, regulations are probably a good idea. But I don't think they're a panacea. I mean, the ability to greatly reduce the methane emissions simply isn't there. The technologies for developing gas without some of these emissions, we might be able to cut emissions by 1/3. I think that's possible with great effort and expense. I don't think we can do more than that, and that's still too much. And again, within 20 years, the world needs to be free of all fossil fuels. So instead of spending a lot of effort trying to figure out how to slightly reduce methane emissions from this technology we need to get away from anyway, why not use those financial resources and buy more heat pumps or, buy more battery storage or whatever it is we need to make the transition work?
Yeah, because sometimes, and it looks like that we are adopting measures that are making the situation worse. Like right now, when we are choosing the transitional fuel, which is LNG from the United States, and it's actually worse than the domestic coal. And what matters finally? What matters? The emissions. the CO2 emissions, methane emissions. And I'm pretty pessimistic about the people that they don't understand it. Yeah, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to solve things and so on. So what is your position on the current fight against the climate change? What we should do?
Well, I mean, climate change is real. We're either at or very, very close to blowing through 1.5 degrees temperature globally compared to the pre-industrial baseline. We're going to hit 2 degrees C within the next decade to 25 years at the max. And, back in Paris in 2015 at COP21, all of the nations of the world agreed we should try to keep the planet below 1.5. Well, we're there. And well below 2 degrees C, well, we're approaching there. And the reason was that the science is clear. As we approach those temperatures, we're already seeing large amounts of climate disruption, climate damage. But that's going to grow exponentially as we continue to warm the Earth. And as we hit these targets of 1.5 to 2 degrees C, we run an increasing risk of fundamentally changing the climate system, hitting thresholds in the climate system, leading to runaway climate catastrophe on the scale that no one living today, no human society has ever seen. And it could take 10,000 years for the climate to restore itself. That would be catastrophic for our society. So, again, the climate science community is near unanimous in saying these are real risks. We need to move away. Fossil fuels is the cause. Let's be clear about that. 85% of the problem is fossil fuels. It's methane and carbon dioxide. We need to move away from fossil fuels. We need to be largely done with them in 20 years. That's the scary news. I don't want to scare people, but it's real. They should be scared at that level. The good news is we really do have the technologies now to make the transition to a decarbonized, fossil fuel-free future in a cost-effective way that would be good for people's health, good for jobs, good for economy. It's all there. And the only losers in that are those who own the big oil and gas companies and want to hold on to making profits off of their assets, which would otherwise be stranded.
Okay.
It's to me, the choice is clear. And I'm delighted to be able to talk to you and others in the Czech Republic to try to get that message out.
Yeah, we will. What will happen in the near future. So thank you for the interview and have a nice day.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Politika, zprávy i lifestyle. Objevte podcasty Dataran.